Dr. Mortimer J. Adler will undertake to discuss some aspect of a basic idea. Dr. Adler.
Welcome to another discussion of the great ideas. Today, we shall consider the great idea of punishment. And in the time we have together, I would like to devote all our attention to what I consider the central problem in connection with this great idea. The problem of the purpose of punishment. This is a perennial problem. It exists in every age, and I think it exists for every human being. Whether he considers it in relation to the punishment of criminals in the society to which he belongs, or the punishment of his own children, or punishment in the school as well as in the home, or punishment that sometimes he has inflicted upon himself. Now, there's no problem about what punishment is. On this, almost all men agree. Punishment consists in the infliction of pain with a purpose, not purposeless or meaningless infliction of pain, but the infliction of pain for a definite purpose. There are, of course, different kinds of pain, and so there is some distinction in the kinds of punishment. The main distinction is between what the writers call the pain of sense as opposed to the pain of loss. What you might say is physical pain, the pain we feel when we are whipped or made to suffer the agonies of the flesh. That kind of pain, as opposed to what you might call moral pain when we are deprived of something, as when we are deprived of our liberty, when we are imprisoned and cannot do exactly as we wish, even though we may be very comfortably situated. There may be no physical pain, and merely the deprivation of freedom. Now, the distinction that we have come to make between cruel and unusual punishments on the one hand, and more humane punishments on the other, turns on this distinction between the pain of sense and the pain of loss. Imprisonment is a much more humane punishment than being lashed, being whipped, being hung by one's thumbs, or otherwise physically maltreated. But the central problem is not a problem about the kinds of punishment, or what punishment is more humane, what more cruel. The central problem is the problem of the purpose of punishment. Why do we punish? What do we seek to achieve by punishing? What is our reason when we punish, whether that be in the state, in the execution of the criminal law, or in the management of a family, or in the running of a school, or any other corporate enterprise? I have the feeling that each of you has faced this problem. I doubt if any human being can live very long without either suffering punishment or inflicting it and asking himself its purpose or its reason. Any of us who have discussed the whole problem of capital punishment, or the problem of such devices as probation and parole and the indeterminate sentence, realizes that these problems raise the question of the justification, the purpose, the objective of punishment. You may know that the code of the motion picture industry has in it one stipulation, that crime shall not go unpunished. And you ask why this is so, there are several answers. Because morally it is wrong for the criminal to go unpunished. And sometimes the answer is because if the criminal goes unpunished, persons might be encouraged to commit crimes if they thought they'd get away with it without punishment. These are quite different answers. For in the one case, the emphasis is on deterrence of criminals. On the other case, the moral rightness of punishing the criminal. Now let me see if I can state the issue for you, the issue we want to discuss. Because here there are two extremes. At the one extreme, there is the position of those who say that punishment is a matter of strict justice. It is a matter entirely of retribution, of retaliation, of punishing the criminal precisely because the criminal or the wrongdoer did wrong. At the other extreme is the position which I would say where the first one is one of strict justice, the second one is entirely a position of expediency, where the punishment is justified entirely in terms of the good result it produces, a result like preventing more crime, preventing the repetition of the wrongful act. The two basic words here that more or less summarize these two opposed positions are the words retribution and prevention. Let me write them down for you. One position says that punishment is entirely retributive. Its whole aim is to achieve retribution for the guilty person. The other position says that the aim of punishment is prevention, either by reforming the criminal or deterring other persons from committing crimes or similar offenses. Now what I'm going to do is try to state these two positions, first the retributive position and then the preventive position. Having stated the two positions, I would then like to indicate what difficulties there are in each of these two extreme positions, and finally ask you whether or not the two positions can be in any way combined or reconciled. And in the course of doing that, I'd like to see if you can make up your own mind as to which position you take, or whether you try to combine them both somehow. Let me begin by stating the retributive position, the position that the only purpose of punishment is to retaliate on the wrongdoer for his wrongdoing. This position holds that punishment simply rights a wrong, that justice requires that the wrongdoer be wronged in turn, be punished in proportion to the gravity of the wrongdoer's offense. The sense of this position is that by punishing in proportion to the seriousness of the offense, the balance of justice is restored. You all know, I'm sure, how old this view of punishment is. It goes back to the Old Testament, where we find in the Mosaic law the famous lex talionis. I'm sure you all know the familiar statement of that rule. Thou shalt give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, burning for burning, wound for wound, and stripe for stripe. Now you will remember that in the Gospels, Jesus Christ said, "You have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you, that you shall resist not evil. But whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also." This doesn't mean that that punishment is completely removed. For in the New Testament, St. Paul enjoins us as follows. "Avenge not yourselves," he says, "for it is written, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord." And the ruler of the state, the government of society, is, according to St. Paul, God's minister, the minister of God who carries the sword to execute justice upon those who do evil. Now, this view of retributive punishment is not exclusively to be found in the Old or the New Testament. One finds it also in the writings of the ancient Greeks, in that great play or series of tragedies by Aeschylus that dealt with the killing and the vengeance, the killing of one man in return for the killing of another. We find these extraordinary lines. Aeschylus says, "Justice claims aloud her debt. Who in blood hath dipped the steel, deep in blood her meed shall feel. Whosoever shall take the sword shall perish by the sword." Now this view is that it's immoral to punish for any ulterior purpose, that it's intrinsically immoral to punish in order to reform the criminal or to deter others from committing crimes or wrongs. That nothing except justice, retaliatory justice, justifies punishment. Let me read you the two classic statements of this theory of punishment. They are to be found in the writings of the two great German philosophers, Immanuel Kant and George Friedrich Hegel. Let me read you the passages as they are found in the Syntopicon. The first is from Kant. Kant says, "Juridical punishment can never be administered merely as a means for promoting another good, either with regard to the criminal himself or to civil society, but must in all cases be imposed only because the individual on whom it is inflicted has committed a crime." The penal law, says Kant, is a categorical imperative. It means a strict rule of duty. You must do it because it's right to do. And woe to him who creeps through the serpent windings of utilitarianism to discover some advantage that may discharge him from the justice of punishment or even from the due measure of it. And if we turn to the writings of Hegel, we find a similar statement of this basic point of view. Crime is an evil, says Hegel, but punishment is not an evil. Punishment is good because it rights a wrong. To regard punishment as an evil, Hegel says, is the fundamental presupposition of those who regard it as preventive, as a deterrent, or as reformative. While on these theories, what on these theories is supposed to result from punishment is characterized, quite superficially, says Hegel, as a good. But the precise point at issue is the wrong that was done and the righting of that wrong. If you adopt the superficial attitude toward punishment, you brush aside the objective treatment of the righting of a wrong. And he goes on to say that when you are concerned with reforming the wrongdoer, making him better, or deterring others, you are treating the wrongdoer not as a man who deserves to be punished because he has done wrong, but as an animal you are trying to train. It is all right to punish animals for this reason, but men deserve to be punished strictly as a matter of justice. Now I say, these two statements I just read you, one from Kant and one from Hegel, indicate the extreme position that there is no ground, no reason for punishment except retaliation or retribution. A wrong has been done and it must be righted by punishment, and no other end must be considered. At the opposite extreme is a theory which says that the whole purpose of punishment is prevention, either by the reformation, the correction, the improvement of the wrongdoer, or by the deterrence of potential wrongdoers from committing wrong. Here, this emphasis on reformation or deterrence as the sole purposes or justifications of punishment leads the persons who hold this view to go so far as to say that no one is to be punished simply because he did wrong. Wrongdoing itself is not the reason for punishment. Now, this is a hard thing to understand, but perhaps one can understand this extreme position by this comparison. If a man damages the property of another man, and the person whose property is damaged goes to law, he gets compensation. If he wins the case, he gets some kind of compensation or restitution. In the Old Testament, again, it said that if you stole a man's pig, you had to return a pig to him. If you tore down his fence, you had to rebuild his fence. If a man breaches a contract and you suffer a certain amount of injury in business, the man who is guilty of the breach of contract must, according to the law, in some way compensate you for the injury, the financial injury you suffer. Now, the point is that though this kind of balance, this kind of rectification happens in civil cases, you have this kind of compensatory or rectificatory justice. The utilitarian view of punishment says that punishment doesn't work this way. If someone is killed, you do not compensate the family of the person who is killed by killing the murderer. Nor if a person injures the state, is the state compensated by the punishment of the wrongdoer. So that those who hold this theory say that justice does not require the punishment of the wrongdoer. Oliver Wendell Holmes, Mr. Justice Holmes, who took this extreme view, said that retribution wasn't an expression of justice at all. It was mere vengeance. It was retaliation of a vengeful sort. Let me read you the passage in which he expresses himself on this subject. This is from his famous book, On the Common Law. Holmes says, "I think it will be seen on self-inspection that this feeling of fitness, the fitness of punishment as something that's deserved by wrongdoing, that this feeling of fitness is absolute and unconditional only in the case of our neighbors. It does not seem to me that anyone who has satisfied himself that an act of his was wrong and that he would never do it again would feel the least need or propriety as between himself and any earthly punishing power alone of his being made to suffer for what he had done. Although when third persons were introduced, he might, as a philosopher, admit the necessity of hurting himself to frighten others. But when our neighbors do wrong, we sometimes feel the fitness of making them smart for it, whether they have repented or not. The feeling of fitness," says Holmes, "seems to me only vengeance in disguise." Now, according to this view, that punishment should try to reform the criminal, change his character, or deter others from committing wrongs, punishment should fit the criminal, should be made to fit the criminal, not the crime. There should be no effort to proportion the severity of punishment to the gravity of the offense. Rather, the punishment should be modeled or molded to do for the criminal the best that can be done for him so far as making him a better man is concerned. You remember in Gilbert and Sullivan's Mikado, the Lord High Executioner keeps singing, "My object all sublime is to make the punishment fit the crime." But according to this view, the punishment should not fit the crime. It should fit the criminal. Now, just as before, I read you a classic statement of the view that retribution is the end of punishment. Let me read you now a great statement of the utilitarian position, that punishment is for the sake of prevention. We find this in the dialogues of Plato. Plato says, "No one punishes the evildoer for the reason that he has done wrong." Just the opposite of Kant and Hegel. No one punishes the evildoer for the reason that he has done wrong. Only the unreasonable fury of the beast acts in that manner. He who desires to inflict rational punishment does not retaliate, says Plato, does not retaliate for a past wrong which cannot be undone. He has regard only to the future and is desirous that the man who is punished and those who see him punished may be deterred from doing wrong again. He punishes entirely for the sake of prevention. That's Plato. Let me read you a similar statement many centuries later from the English philosopher Thomas Hobbes, so that you get a full sense of this position which says that punishment is solely with regard to the future, not with regard to the past wrong, but the future, the reform of the criminal or the deterrence of other persons. Hobbes says the chief aim of punishment through reformation and deterrence is to maintain public peace. In punishing, he says, we do not look at the evil which has been done in the past, but only at the greatness of the good we wish to achieve. Whereby, he says, whereby we are forbidden to inflict punishment with any other design than for the correction of the offender or the direction of others. Anything else is an act of hostility. And then later, Rousseau says that the wise statesman is one who knows how, by punishing crimes, to prevent them. And the most important thing is the reformation of the criminal himself. There is not a single evildoer, according to Rousseau, who could not be turned to some good. The state has no right to put to death, even for the sake of making an example, anyone whom it can leave alive without danger. Now this gives you the other extreme position, which insists that punishment is solely for the sake of preventing future wrongdoing. Now I want to ask you the hard question. Which of these two positions do you take? Let me see if I can help you by giving you some examples and showing you how you'd have to decide particular cases according as you took one position or the other. Suppose that you, and you alone, no one else in the world, you alone, knew that a man was guilty of murder. He had confessed his guilt to you. But suppose you also knew that he completely repented of this crime and would never commit another crime or do anything wrong. Would you punish him? If you take the retributive position, you certainly would. He is guilty and deserves to be punished. If you take the utilitarian position, you would not punish him because he is reformed and no one knowing of his crime, there'd be no deterrent value in punishing him. Or let's take another case. Suppose you knew that if you punished this man publicly, you would deter a great deal of wrongdoing. Yet you knew that this man was not guilty of any crime at all. He was an innocent person, but you could make an example of him and deter others. Would you punish him? If you take the retributive position, you would say not at all. He is guiltless and therefore does not deserve to be punished. But if you take the utilitarian position, you might say, since the end of punishment is the prevention of crime or wrongdoing, it makes no difference whether this person is guilty or not. If we punish him, we achieve some good by deterring others. Or take some other examples. Would you punish a man severely even if the result made him a more hardened criminal than he was, instead of reforming him, simply because the severity of the punishment was proportionate to the offense he committed? If you take the retributive position, you will punish him in proportion to his crime, regardless of whether or not you would harden him as a criminal. But if you take the utilitarian position, you would say, no. The important thing here is to correct this man, treat him in such a manner that he is reformed, regardless of whether we have to treat him lightly or severely in order to do this. Or to take one other case. Here are two men. One has committed a very slight offense and one a serious offense. But suppose you knew that if you punished the man who committed the light offense severely and the man who committed the very serious offense lightly, you would improve them both. Would you do that? If you took the utilitarian position, you would, because your aim is to make punishment fit the criminal, not the crime. But if you take the retributive position, you would not. You would treat the man who committed the slight offense in a light manner, and you would treat severely the man who committed the very grave offense. Now this indicates the options you have. In view of this, let me ask again, which position do you take? The extreme retributive position or the extreme utilitarian position? Now you may say to me, do I have to take either of these extreme positions? You may answer my question, the one I've just given you, by saying, why must I take either extreme? Is there no way of combining these positions, of reconciling some truth in the one with some truth in the other? Isn't there some middle ground which avoids what seems the difficulty of the two extremes? And I think I can show you that there appears to be middle ground because some of the great thinkers and writers about punishment seem to have combined something from the utilitarian position with something from the retributive position. For example, Plato, let me get Plato a moment, seems to combine both positions. He says, the proper purpose of punishment is twofold. He who is rightly punished ought either to become better and profit by it, or he ought to be made an example to his fellows, that he may see what he suffers and fear and become better. Now that so far as he says that, he's emphasizing prevention, reform of the wrongdoer, or the deterrence of potential wrongdoers. But then he goes on to say, but the law should aim at the right measure of punishment, and in all cases, at the deserved punishment. Now those words, the right measure of punishment and at the deserved punishment, indicates that Plato was also saying, but a man must be guilty in order to be punished, and the punishment should somehow fit the guilt. Or, to take one other great thinker, St. Thomas Aquinas in the Summa Theologica, who talks about punishment, both divine and human punishment, we find again the three things combined somehow. Aquinas says that retribution, or just retribution, is not the only reason for punishment. Sometimes punishment is for the good of those who are punished, and sometimes for the correction of others who are deterred from wrongdoing. But notice what Aquinas is saying. In addition to retribution, he is saying, one can punish in order to reform the wrongdoer or to prevent others from wrongdoing. So that he seems to say there are three reasons for punishment: retribution or retaliation, reformation, and deterrence. Now, if you look at Aquinas carefully, I think you will find that he does not think these three things are equal or coordinate. For in this passage where he deals with the matter, I'm not going to bother to read it to you, he says that retribution is not only the primary, but the essential, the indispensable condition in punishment. And then over and above that, as secondary purposes of punishment, one can attempt to prevent wrongdoing by reforming criminals or deterring others from committing crimes. Now, if I were to attempt to state for you, in principle, how these two extreme views can be reconciled, I would say it somewhat as follows. On the one hand, the truth in the retributive position is that only the guilty shall be punished. No one shall be punished who is innocent. This is why you and I recoil from the use of men as hostages, killing them or making an example of them in order to prevent others from doing certain things. They're innocent and should not be punished for any reason. Only the guilty shall be punished, but then we add something which the retributive theory doesn't say. Though only the guilty shall be punished and all the guilty shall be punished, we should not try to proportion the punishment to their guilt, but try to make the punishment fit the criminal or the wrongdoer rather than the crime. Now, on the utilitarian side, what is the truth we want to preserve? It is that guilt, though it is a condition of punishment, is not the justification of punishment or the purpose of it. Though we do not punish anyone who is not guilty, nevertheless, when we do punish, our aim is not mere retribution. Our aim is to reform the wrongdoer or prevent others from doing wrong. Now, are these two things consistent? Can we put these two positions together so that we can punish in a consistent and coherent manner? I am not sure I know the answer to the question. I think it is a hard one to think about, and I urge you to think about it for yourself. It often seems to me that it is very difficult to punish consistently, because sometimes if we try to punish retributively, we get in the way of punishing. We impede ourselves from punishing effectively in a manner that deters criminals or that reforms them. And sometimes when we punish lightly in order to reform this particular criminal, we are failing to deter others who are impressed by the lightness of his punishment. It is extremely difficult, I think, to punish with all these three ends in mind: retribution to the guilty person, reformation of his character, and the deterrence of others. Yet, somehow, in all our legal systems, and I'm sure that it is true of your home and my home, when we punish children, we somehow combine these things. We do not punish innocent persons. We punish them only because they're guilty. We do relate somehow the severity of the punishment to the gravity of the offense, and yet we do try to reform the wrongdoer and deter wrongdoing. This concludes our discussion of the main problem of punishment.